Certified case files. Genuine evidence. Objective truth. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Sir, I gave you a lawful order. Show me your ID now or this gets real bad real fast.
Standing on a public sidewalk, I haven't committed a crime. Back up and lower your voice.
You don't get to tell me how to do my job. People called because you look suspicious.
Suspicious isn't a crime. Touch me and you're crossing a...
Officer Derek Vance had been a patrolman with the Oak Creek Police Department for 5 years when he made the decision that would end his career, bankrupt a local business, and cost the taxpayers of his city $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, aggressive, and convinced that his badge gave him absolute authority over every square inch of sidewalk in his precinct. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, he responded to a call about a suspicious individual refusing to leave a storefront. The individual was Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old retired Army Ranger with 3 combat tours, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart, who was standing quietly outside his barber's shop, waiting for the door to unlock. What happened in the next 12 minutes? The escalation, the disregard for protocol, the physical manhandling of a disabled veteran, and the absolute refusal to listen to reason would become a viral firestorm that exposed the deep rot within the department's disciplinary system. It would show the world exactly what happens when a community's definition of suspicious is based entirely on skin color, and when a police officer values compliance over the Constitution. Before we dive into the details of this case, where are you watching from today? We have viewers from all over the world, and I'd love to know who is joining us. And if you believe that those who served our country deserve to be treated with dignity, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us tell these stories that the mainstream media often overlooks. The incident took place on Elm Street, a historic district in Oak Creek that was in the middle of a painful transition. For decades, it had been a working-class neighborhood home to auto repair shops, family diners, and the Golden Shears Barber Shop, a fixture of the community for 40 years. But recently, the money had moved in. The auto shops were becoming yoga studios. The diners were becoming high-end bistros, serving $12 avocado toast. And the people who had lived and worked there for generations were suddenly being looked at like intruders in their own neighborhood. It was 9:45 a.m. The sun was shining, casting long shadows across the brick storefronts. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne arrived at the Golden Shears 5 minutes early for his usual bi-weekly cut. Thorne was a man of routine. He liked things precise. He stood 6'2" with the ramrod straight posture of a man who had spent his entire adult life standing at attention. He wore a crisp button-down shirt tucked into khakis, a leather belt, and clean boots. He was the definition of respectable. He stood near the edge of the sidewalk, checking his watch, enjoying the morning air. He didn't pace. He didn't check his phone incessantly. He just stood waiting for the barber, old Mr. Henderson, to flip the sign to open. But next door to the barber shop was a new business, Curated, a high-end boutique selling imported home goods and minimalist furniture. The owner was Brent Calloway, a 32-year-old transplant from the suburbs who had opened the shop 6 months prior. Calloway was deeply invested in the aesthetic of the street. He wanted high-foot traffic, but only the right kind of foot traffic. He wanted shoppers with disposable income, not locals hanging around. Calloway was inside his shop arranging a display of artisanal vases when he looked out the window and saw Thorne. He didn't see a decorated veteran. He didn't see a paying customer waiting for an appointment. He saw a large black man standing still on the sidewalk, not moving, looking imposing. In Calloway's mind, Thorne didn't fit the vibe. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't walking. He was just there. And for Brent Calloway, that was enough to warrant a crisis. He watched Thorne for exactly 4 minutes. He saw Thorne check his watch. He saw Thorne look down the street. Then Calloway picked up his phone. He didn't go outside to ask, "Can I help you?" He didn't wave hello. He dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Hi, this isn't an emergency, but I need an officer at 404 Elm Street. There's a guy loitering right in front of my display window. He's been there for 20 minutes, just staring. It's making my customers uncomfortable. Is he threatening anyone? Is he armed? I don't know if he's armed. He's a big guy. He looks agitated. I think he might be casing the place or waiting to harass people. I just want him moved along. It's bad for business. Okay, sir. We'll send a unit to check it out. Calloway hung up, feeling a sense of righteous accomplishment. He was protecting his investment. He had no idea that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would destroy his livelihood. Do you think business owners use the police as their private security force too often? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Officer Derek Vance received the dispatch at 9:52 a.m. Suspicious male loitering, possible casing of a business 404 Elm. Vance was a man who prided himself on his instincts, though his disciplinary file suggested his instincts were terrible. In his 5 years on the force, Vance had accrued 14 complaints. 14. Most officers go an entire career with 1 or 2. Vance had a file thick enough to be a novel. The complaints followed a specific ugly pattern: stops without probable cause, escalation of verbal disputes, excessive force against non-violent offenders, and almost exclusively, these incidents involved men of color. There was the time he tackled a delivery driver for parking aggressively. The time he detained a college professor walking his dog because he fit the description of a suspect in a burglary 3 towns over. In every instance, Vance was cleared or given a minor reprimand. His supervisors, particularly the patrol lieutenant, liked his proactive policing stats. Vance made arrests. He wrote tickets. He generated revenue. So the complaints were filed away, categorized as unfounded or exonerated. Vance turned his patrol car toward Elm Street, his mind already made up. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to enforce. The dispatcher had said loitering and suspicious. That was all Vance needed. He visualized the suspect before he even saw him, someone defying the social order, someone who needed to be taught a lesson about who ran the streets. He parked his cruiser 2 spots down from the boutique, not blocking the traffic, but positioned for a tactical approach. He exited the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt. He was 5 feet 10 inches stocky with a buzz cut that he thought made him look military, though he had never served a day in uniform outside of the police academy. He walked briskly toward the boutique. He saw Calloway inside, pointing subtly toward the barber shop. And then he saw Marcus Thorne. Thorne was still standing in the same spot, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, the parade rest position ingrained in him from decades of morning formations. He was looking at the barber shop door, wondering why Mr. Henderson was 5 minutes late. He heard the heavy boots approaching on the pavement but didn't flinch. He didn't run. He didn't look guilty. He just turned his head slowly as Officer Vance encroached on his personal space. "Hey, you! Let me see some ID." "No." "Good morning." "No." "Sir, do you live around here?" "Just a demand." Thorne turned fully to face the officer. He looked at Vance's nameplate, then up at his eyes. Thorne's face was a map of discipline. He spoke calmly, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried the weight of command. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" "The problem is you hanging around here. I asked for ID. I'm waiting for the barbershop to open. I have a 10 a.m. appointment with Mr. Henderson. He's running a few minutes late." Vance stepped closer. He was now within 2 feet of Thorne, a deliberate intimidation tactic. "I didn't ask for your life story. I asked for your ID. We have reports of you loitering and harassing business owners. Now let's go. ID." Thorne didn't blink. He knew the law. He knew his rights. And more importantly, he knew that he was a free citizen in the country he had bled for. "Officer, I am not loitering. I am a customer waiting for a business to open. I am not operating a vehicle. I have committed no crime. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed a crime, I am not required to provide identification. I'm just going to wait for my haircut. This was the moment, the off-ramp. Vance could have looked at the barber shop, seen the closed sign, looked at the well-dressed man and said, "Okay, sir, just stay out of the doorway." But Vance didn't take off-ramps. He took offense. To him, a black man knowing the law was an insult. A black man refusing a command was a threat. "You want to play lawyer on the sidewalk, is that it?" Vance's hand drifted toward his handcuffs. "I'm telling you that you are trespassing. The owner of that building wants you gone. Now you can show me ID so I can run you for warrants, or you can go in the back of the car. Your choice." "I'm on a public sidewalk," Thorne said, his voice remaining level though his heart rate was climbing. He had been in firefights in the Korangal Valley. He had been pinned down by sniper fire in Fallujah. He wasn't afraid of Derek Vance, but he was weary. Deeply weary of having to prove his right to exist. "I am not trespassing, and I don't have warrants. I'm a retired master sergeant. I suggest you take a breath, officer." "Don't you tell me what to do," Vance snapped. The mention of military rank didn't register, or if it did, it only annoyed him. He saw it as a challenge to his authority. "Last chance, ID or cuffs." By now, people were stopping. A woman walking her dog paused across the street. A young man in a delivery truck rolled down his window. Phones were coming out. The modern weapon of truth was being drawn from pockets and purses. Thorne saw the phones. He knew what this was. He spoke clearly for the record. "I am refusing your unlawful order. I am not identifying myself because I have committed no crime. I am waiting for a haircut." Vance lunged. He didn't de-escalate. He didn't call a supervisor. He grabbed Thorne's left arm, the arm with the reconstructed shoulder, the one that still ached when it rained, the one held together by pins and patriotism. "Turn around. You're under arrest. Watch the shoulder." Thorne grunted pain shooting through his nervous system like a lightning bolt. "I have a combat injury. Do not wrench that arm." "Stop resisting." Vance yelled the catch-all phrase used to justify force against a compliant body. Thorne wasn't fighting back. He wasn't pulling away. He was stiffening his body to protect his injury, a natural physiological response to pain. Vance interpreted this rigidity as active resistance. Vance kicked Thorne's legs apart, forcing him off balance. He shoved the older man against the rough brick wall of the boutique. Thorne's face pressed against the masonry. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto his right wrist. "I am not resisting," Thorne said through gritted teeth, the pain in his shoulder blinding him momentarily. "You are making a mistake, son. A massive mistake." "Shut up." Vance cranked the left arm back. Thorne gasped. The torque on the joint was excruciating. It felt like the metal pins were tearing through the bone. "You're done. You're going to jail." The crowd was shouting now. "He's a veteran. He comes here every week," yelled the delivery driver. "He didn't do anything. He was just standing there," screamed the woman with the dog. Brent Calloway watched from inside his boutique, his face pale. This wasn't what he expected. He wanted the loiterer shooed away. He didn't expect a violent arrest. He didn't expect the cameras. He saw the gathered crowd pointing their phones at his store, at the officer, at the scene he had created. He backed away from the window, retreating into the shadows of his artisanal vases, but it was too late. The internet sees everything. Vance tightened the cuffs. He made them tight, punitive tight. The metal bit into Thorne's wrists, cutting off circulation. He patted Thorne down, roughly reaching into his pockets, pulling out a wallet, keys, a phone. He threw them on the hood of the patrol car. "Now we'll see who you are," Vance sneered. He opened the wallet. The first thing he saw wasn't a driver's license. It was a folded, laminated card. The Department of Defense retired identification. And behind it, a smaller card, the Veterans Affairs Disability ID. 100% service connected. Vance paused for a microsecond. Just a flicker of hesitation. But his ego wouldn't let him stop. He had already gone hands-on. He had already announced the arrest. To stop now would be to admit he was wrong, and Derek Vance did not admit he was wrong. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. "Get in the car." "I need you to loosen these cuffs," Thorne said, sweat beading on his forehead from the pain. "My shoulder is locked up. You're tearing the rotator cuff." "You should have thought of that before you acted like a tough guy," Vance said. He grabbed Thorne by the back of the neck and shoved him into the cramped back seat of the cruiser. Thorne, a man who had led platoons, who had saved lives, who had been decorated by generals, had to contort his broken body to fit into the cage. Vance slammed the door. The sound echoed down Elm Street like a gunshot. "Do you think officers should be personally liable for injuries caused during unlawful arrests? Let me know in the comments. This is a question we need to ask because Marcus Thorne was about to go on a ride that would change the history of the Oak Creek Police Department. The drive to the precinct was short, only about 10 minutes, but for Master Sergeant Thorne it was an exercise in mental fortitude. He sat in the back, the pain in his shoulder radiating down to his fingertips, which were beginning to go numb from the tight cuffs. He didn't yell. He didn't bang on the glass. He did what he had been trained to do in captivity, he observed. He memorized. He noted the time, 10:08 a.m. He noted the officer's driving speed, reckless. He noted the officer's demeanor, glancing constantly in the rearview mirror, looking for a reaction, looking for fear. Thorne gave him none. He stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the horizon, breathing rhythmically to manage the pain. Vance was nervous now. The adrenaline was fading and the reality was setting in. He had seen the military ID. He knew the guy wasn't a homeless drifter, but Vance convinced himself he could write this up. Disorderly conduct. Failure to obey. Resisting arrest. He started rehearsing the narrative in his head. Subject was belligerent. Subject took a fighting stance. I feared for my safety. It was a script he had used before. It usually worked. They arrived at the precinct, Sally Port. Vance pulled the car in and killed the engine. He hauled Thorne out of the back again, handling him with unnecessary roughness. Thorne stumbled but caught his footing. Vance marched him through the heavy steel doors and into the booking area. The booking desk was manned by Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a relic of the old guard. He was 2 years away from retirement, tired and possessed of a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. He had a son in the Marines. He respected the job, but he hated the cowboys. He had been watching Vance for a long time, waiting for the kid to trip up. He didn't know the trip-up had just walked through the door in handcuffs. "What do we have, Vance?" Miller asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Trespassing, disorderly resisting," Vance recited quickly. "Refused to ID, caused a scene at the boutique on Elm. Guy thinks he's tough." Miller looked up. He saw the tall black man in the khakis and button-down. He saw the gray at the temples. He saw the posture. And then he looked at the man's face. Miller froze. He didn't know Thorne personally, but he knew the type. And he saw the pain in the man's eyes, the way he was favoring his left shoulder. "Sir," Miller said, addressing the prisoner, not the officer. "Are you injured?" "I have a service-connected injury to my left shoulder." Thorne said, his voice calm but strained. "The officer wrenched it behind my back despite my warning. I believe something is torn. The handcuffs are also cutting off circulation." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at Vance. "You wrenched a shoulder. Did he swing at you?" "He stiffened up. He was resisting." Vance defended. "I was standing at parade rest," Thorne corrected. "I refused an unlawful order to identify myself while waiting for a haircut." Miller stood up. "Uncuff him, now." "Sarge, he's a suspect." "I said, uncuff him. Vance, right now." Miller's voice boomed off the concrete walls. Vance fumbled for his keys. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne's arms dropped. He winced, rotating his left shoulder. A sickening click was audible. Thorne let out a sharp breath. "I need your ID, sir," Miller said, his tone completely different. "Just so we can sort this out." "It's in his pocket." Thorne nodded at Vance. Vance reluctantly pulled the wallet out and handed it to the sergeant. Miller opened it. He saw the blue retiree card. He saw the Silver Star license plate registration tucked in the back. He looked at the name. Marcus Thorne. Miller's face went white. "Master Sergeant Thorne, the one who runs the veteran outreach program at the community center?" "That's me," Thorne said. Miller threw the wallet down on the desk and looked at Vance with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You arrested Marcus Thorne. You arrested a Silver Star recipient for standing on a sidewalk." I didn't know who he was. He wouldn't tell me." "Because he didn't have to," Miller roared. "It's 10 o'clock a.m. on a Tuesday. He's not a gang member. He's a pillar of this community." Miller came around the desk. "Mr. Thorne, I am calling the chief, and I am calling paramedics for that shoulder. Please sit down. I apologize. I apologize on behalf of this entire department. This is a disaster." Vance stood there, the blood draining from his face. "Sarge, the business owner, called. He said—" "I don't give a damn what the business owner said," Miller hissed, stepping into Vance's personal space. "You have eyes. You have a brain. You're supposed to use them. You just assaulted a war hero because you couldn't handle a little attitude. Give me your badge. Put it on the desk." "What?" "Administrative leave. Pending investigation. Gun and badge. Now. Get out of my sight before I throw you in a cell myself." The realization hit Vance like a freight train. This wasn't going away. This wasn't a write-up. This was the end. By the time the paramedics arrived to ice Thorne's shoulder, the video from Elm Street had already been uploaded to Twitter. It had 5,000 views. 10 minutes later, it had 50,000. By noon, it was trending nationally. Hashtag veteran arrested, hashtag Oak Creek police, hashtag walking while black. The video was damning. It showed everything. The calm demeanor of Thorne, the aggressive posturing of Vance, the clear statement, "I have a combat injury," the violent wrenching of the arm, the crowd screaming, "He's a veteran." It was impossible to spin. It was impossible to defend. The fallout was nuclear. The American Legion issued a statement by 2 o'clock p.m. The treatment of Master Sergeant Thorne is a national disgrace. The VFW followed suit. Civil rights attorneys were on the phone with Thorne before he even left the hospital. The Oak Creek Police Department was under siege. The phone lines were jammed. The email servers crashed. Reporters from CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC were setting up satellite trucks outside the precinct. The chief of police, a man who had tried to ignore the complaints about Vance for years, was forced to hold a press conference at 4 p.m. He looked sweaty and terrified. "We are conducting a full and transparent investigation," he stammered. But the internet investigators were faster. By evening, Vance's entire disciplinary history had been leaked. The 14 complaints, the pattern of racial profiling, the fact that he had been retraining 3 times but never disciplined. The narrative shifted from one bad apple to a rotten orchard. And then there was Brent Calloway, the boutique owner. The internet found him too. They found the reviews for his shop. They found his 911 call, which was released under a Freedom of Information Act request within 24 hours. "He's making my customers uncomfortable." The hypocrisy was staggering. The backlash was immediate. People lined up outside his shop not to buy vases, but to stand silently staring at the window, mimicking Thorne's posture. A silent protest. Calloway didn't open his doors the next day, or the day after. Internal Affairs didn't have to dig deep. The evidence was overwhelming. They interviewed the barber, Mr. Henderson, who was weeping. "He's been coming here for 10 years. He's the finest man I know. I was just 5 minutes late. If I had been on time." They interviewed the witnesses. They watched the Bodycam footage, which was even worse than the bystander video. The Bodycam audio picked up Vance muttering under his breath, "I'm gonna teach this guy." Premeditation, malice. Thorne didn't speak to the media immediately. He went home to his wife. He iced his shoulder. He sat in his living room surrounded by his medals and photos of the men he had served with, some of whom hadn't made it back. He felt humiliated. He felt angry. But mostly, he felt a profound sense of betrayal. He had defended the Constitution overseas only to have it violated on Main Street. The legal hammer dropped 3 months later. The lawsuit filed by Thorne's attorneys was a masterclass in civil rights litigation. It cited the Fourth Amendment violations, the excessive force, the false imprisonment, and the Monell claim, a legal argument proving that the city was liable because they had a policy or custom of ignoring Vance's bad behavior. They proved that the city knew Vance was dangerous and did nothing. The city attorneys looked at the case. They looked at the video. They looked at the jury pool who would never ever vote against a wounded veteran in a case like this. They surrendered. The settlement was announced on a Tuesday exactly 6 months after the arrest. $6.5 million. One of the largest individual settlements in the state's history. But the money was just the headline. The real victory was in the terms. Officer Derek Vance was not just fired, he was decertified. His name was entered into the national database, ensuring he could never wear a badge again in any state. He was 30 years old, unemployed, and facing potential criminal charges for assault, though the DA was still dragging his feet on that. Brent Calloway closed Curated permanently. The brand was toxic. He moved back to the suburbs, his dream of an aesthetic boutique crushed by his own prejudice. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne stood at the podium at City Hall. His left arm in a sling surgery had been required to repair the tear in his rotator cuff. The room was silent. He looked tired but resolute. "I didn't ask for this fight," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "I just wanted a haircut. But I swore an oath a long time ago to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And sometimes the enemy isn't a soldier in a uniform across the ocean. Sometimes the enemy is a mindset right here at home. The mindset that says some people belong and others don't. The mindset that says a badge gives you the right to be a bully." He paused, looking directly at the city council members. "We cannot claim to be the land of the free if we are afraid of our own citizens standing on a sidewalk. Respect isn't something you demand with handcuffs. It's something you earn, and this city has a lot of work to do to earn it back." The room erupted in applause, but Thorne didn't smile. He just nodded, turned, and walked away. The settlement money would ensure his family was taken care of for generations. It would fund the veteran outreach center he ran, but it wouldn't fix his shoulder. It wouldn't erase the memory of being slammed against a wall like a criminal while neighbors watched. It wouldn't undo the shame of having to prove his humanity to a man half his age. This story isn't just about bad policing. It's about the invisible lines we draw in our communities. It's about who we think belongs and who we think is suspicious. It's about the fact that even a silver star couldn't protect Marcus Thorne from the assumption of guilt that follows black men in America. What do you think needs to change to prevent this from happening again? Is it better training, stricter laws, or is it something deeper in our culture? If this story moved you, if you believe that justice should be blind and that our veterans deserve better, please like this video and share it. It helps us keep the lights on and keep telling the truth. And don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories coming that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, freedom is fragile. Watch your six.
Put the cart down and step away from the truck, now.
I paid for this lumber. Receipts in my back pocket.
Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see them.
I'm making a mistake. I'm a federal liaison.
I don't care who you say you are. Turn around. You're going in cuffs.
Easy. These cuffs better come off quick.
Put that cart down and step away from the truck. I'm not asking you again, but I'm loading my supplies. Manager says you're stealing property. I bought this lumber 20 minutes ago. I've got the receipt right here in my pocket. Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see them. You're making a mistake, son. I'm a federal liaison. I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're going into cuffs. Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Richmond for 6 years when he made the decision that would end his career, bankrupt a national retail chain, and cost the city $6.5 million. He was 28 years old, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his instinct for spotting criminals was flawless. On a bright Tuesday morning in the parking lot of Builders Depot, he received a call from a panicked store manager about a theft in progress involving a large man and a shopping cart. The large man was Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired, a 62-year-old combat veteran and current federal veteran liaison who was simply loading plywood for a disabled veterans housing project. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's identification, dismissing physical receipts, and manhandling a decorated war hero in front of a crowd of shoppers, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias rots the badge from the inside out. Before we get into the details, tell me, where are you joining us from today? If you believe that respect should be earned and not demanded by a badge, hit that subscribe button. We are here to shine a light on the truth, and we need your help to do it. Builders Depot sits off the busy interstate bypass, a sprawling concrete box filled with contractors, suburban dads, and the smell of sawdust. It was 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The autumn sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the asphalt. The parking lot was bustling with pickup trucks and vans. Marcus Thorne had backed his Ford F-150 into a spot near the loading zone. He wasn't a man who rushed. At 62, Thorne moved with the deliberate, efficient grace of a man who had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. He stood 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a faded gray t-shirt, work boots, and a ball cap that said Semper Fi. He was currently serving as a federal liaison for the Department of Veterans Affairs, a high-ranking civilian position that tasked him with auditing and facilitating housing programs for wounded warriors. He reported directly to Washington. But today, he was just a man buying 40 sheets of plywood and 20 boxes of framing nails for a renovation project in the city's south side. He had paid $1,200 in cash at the pro desk, shaken hands with the cashier, and wheeled the heavy flatbed cart out to his truck. He was halfway through sliding the third sheet of plywood into the truck bed when he heard the voice. It wasn't a polite "excuse me," it was a bark. "Hey, you stop right there." Thorne paused, holding the weight of the wood with one hand, and turned. Striding toward him was Brett Miller, the store's 29-year-old manager. Miller was wearing a stiff button-down shirt that looked uncomfortable in the heat, and his face was flushed with a mix of adrenaline and indignation. Miller had transferred to this location 3 months ago and had been on a crusade to reduce shrinkage, or theft, which he was convinced was rampant. He saw Thorne, a tall black man in work clothes, moving a large quantity of expensive lumber, and his mind immediately flagged it as suspicious. In Miller's limited worldview, customers who spent that kind of money usually wore polo shirts or company uniforms. They didn't look like Marcus Thorne. "Can I help you?" Thorne asked, his voice a deep baritone that carried easily over the traffic noise. He didn't drop the wood, he just held it waiting. Miller stopped 5 feet away, pointing a finger. "I need to see a receipt for that, right now. We've had guys loading up carts and walking out the front door all month. You're not taking that anywhere." Thorne frowned, his patience already tested by the heavy lifting. "I paid at the pro desk not 10 minutes ago. The receipt is in my back pocket. Let me just load this sheet." "No," Miller shouted, stepping closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Drop the wood. Hands out of your pockets. You're trying to scam us. I saw you bypass the checkout line." Thorne slowly lowered the plywood into the truck bed, dusting his hands off on his jeans. He turned fully to face the younger man towering over him, not with aggression, but with presence. "Son, I didn't bypass anything. I went to the pro desk. If you want to see the receipt, I will show you the receipt, but you need to lower your voice. Miller didn't like being called son, and he certainly didn't like being told what to do by someone he had already decided was a thief. "I'm calling the police," Miller announced, pulling his phone out with a trembling hand. "You're trespassing and you're stealing inventory. Stay right there." Thorne sighed a sound of profound exhaustion. He leaned against the side of his truck, crossed his massive arms, and gestured to the phone. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll wait." Miller dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Thorne, as if he expected the 62-year-old to bolt across the parking lot. "Yes, I have a shoplifter at the Builders Depot on Broad Street. Aggressive male. He's trying to steal $1,000 worth of lumber. He's refusing to leave. I feel threatened. Send someone now." Officer Kyle Vance was 3 miles away when the call came over the radio. "Code 3 response, Builders Depot. Larceny in progress. Suspect is a black male, 60s, large build, reportedly aggressive with staff." Vance hit the lights and sirens, his heart rate jumping. Vance had been with the force for 6 years, and like Officer Bartlett in Seattle, he had a file that was thicker than it should have been. 6 civilian complaints in the last 2 years. Discourtesy, unlawful stop, excessive force. None of them had stuck. The department called him proactive. His sergeant called him a hard charger. The community called him a bully. Vance had a specific view of the world. There were wolves and there were sheepdogs. He considered himself a sheepdog, but he had a terrible habit of seeing wolves where there were only neighbors. As Vance wove through traffic, his mind constructed the scenario before he even saw it. In his head, he wasn't driving toward a misunderstanding. He was driving toward a confrontation. Aggressive male, refusing to leave. These words triggered a tactical response in Vance that overrode his training in de-escalation. He griped the steering wheel, adrenaline flooding his system. He wasn't thinking about conflict resolution. He was thinking about control. Establish dominance, neutralize the threat, secure the scene. That was the mantra. He didn't consider that the suspect might be a customer. He didn't consider that the manager might be wrong. He certainly didn't consider that he was about to go toe-to-toe with a man who had led battalions into combat zones while Vance was still learning to tie his shoes. When Vance's cruiser screeched into the parking lot, he saw the scene exactly as Miller had described it, but interpreted through his own biased lens. He saw a large black man standing by a truck filled with merchandise. He saw a white manager standing back, looking fearful. That was all the confirmation Vance needed. He parked his cruiser diagonally behind Thorne's F-150, effectively boxing him in. He stepped out of the vehicle, not with a notepad, but with his hand resting on the grip of his holstered service weapon. The crowd in the parking lot had grown. Shoppers pushing carts slowed down to watch. A few people had already pulled out their phones. Thorne watched the officer approach. He had seen this walk before. He had seen it in young Marines who were too eager for a fight, and he had seen it in military police who had forgotten that their job was to serve. He stood up straight, uncrossing his arms, keeping his hands visible and open at his sides. He knew the drill. He knew that any sudden movement, any reach for a wallet could be interpreted as a threat by a jittery cop. "Officer," Thorne said calmly as Vance marched up, "I'm glad you're here. Maybe we can clear this up. The manager seems to think—" "Quiet," Vance barked, stopping 6 feet away. "I didn't ask you to speak, you two. Step away from the vehicle. Now." Thorne held his ground, his voice steady. "I am complying, officer. I am stepping away, but I need to tell you that I have proof of purchase right here." "I told you to be quiet," Vance shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He was escalating, feeding off the tension he was creating. "You are being detained for investigation of grand larceny. Turn around and face the truck." Thorne looked at the officer, really looked at him. He saw the sweat on Vance's brow, the tight set of his jaw, the eyes that were darting around but refusing to make genuine human contact. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the command tone he had used to brief generals. "You are making a mistake. I am a federal official. I have identification in my pocket that you need to see. I have a receipt for these goods." Vance stepped forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm. "I said turn around. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Thorne stated clearly, looking directly at the camera phone that a woman in a minivan was pointing at them. "I am standing still. I am telling you that I have a receipt. I am telling you that I am a federal veteran liaison. Check my credentials." Vance sneered. "Federal liaison? Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Anyone can buy a fake badge on the internet. Turn around or you're getting tased." The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Thorne knew he could physically overpower the young officer with little effort. He knew hand-to-hand combat techniques that Vance had only seen in movies. But he also knew that if he so much as flinched, he would be shot. And if he was shot, the narrative would be, "Suspect attacked officer." So he chose the weapon of the disciplined, absolute, terrifying calm. "I am turning around," Thorne said, moving slowly. "I am placing my hands on the truck. You are now arresting a federal employee without cause. You are refusing to verify exculpatory evidence. You are violating my civil rights." Vance didn't care. He kicked Thorne's legs apart, roughly patting him down. He felt the wallet in the back pocket, pulled it out, and threw it on the hood of the truck. He felt the receipt paper, crumpled it, and tossed it to the ground. "That's trash," Vance muttered. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and resisting arrest." He grabbed Thorne's wrists and twisted them behind his back, snapping the handcuffs on tight. Too tight. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the crowd. It was an older man in a plaid shirt. "He showed you the receipt." "We heard him. You threw it on the ground." Vance spun his head around. "Back up, or you're next for obstruction." The manager Miller was smiling now, a smug look of victory on his face. "I told you," Miller said to the crowd. "He was stealing. We have zero tolerance here." Thornface, pressed against the hot metal of his own truck, closed his eyes for a second. He thought of the oath he had taken to support and defend the Constitution. He thought of the Silver Star sitting in a frame in his study awarded for pulling 3 men out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. And now he was being handcuffed by a child with a badge who thought a black man with lumber had to be a thief. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice muffled against the truck. "My credentials are in that wallet you just threw. The badge is silver and gold. It says Department of Veterans Affairs Office of the Secretary. Open it." Vance finished tightening the cuffs and grabbed the wallet. He flipped it open, glanced at the heavy metal badge and the laminated ID card with the holographic seal. He paused for a fraction of a second. A smarter man would have stopped. A smarter man would have seen the words Federal Liaison and Law Enforcement Authority and realized he had stepped into a bear trap. But Vance wasn't smart. He was committed. He snapped the wallet shut and shoved it into his own pocket. "Nice toy," Vance said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Ordered that online, huh? Impersonating a federal officer. That's another charge. Let's go." Vance hauled Thorne away from the truck, marching him toward the patrol car. Thorne didn't struggle. He walked with his head up his eyes, scanning the crowd, memorizing faces, looking for witnesses. "My name is Colonel Marcus Thorne," he announced, his voice projecting like he was on the parade deck. "I am being arrested unlawfully. Please record this. Please keep recording." Vance shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The space was cramped, the hard plastic seat unforgiving. As the door slammed shut, separating him from the outside world, Thorne felt a cold, sharp anger settle in his gut. It wasn't the hot rage of youth. It was the cold, strategic fury of a man who knows exactly how to dismantle an enemy. He watched through the wire mesh as Vance strutted back to the manager, the two of them shaking hands, sharing a laugh. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken out the trash. They had no idea they had just initiated a sequence of events that would burn their professional lives to the ground. The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey through the suburbs. Vance drove with one hand on the wheel, typing on his dash computer with the other. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Thorne's eyes. "You know," Vance said, his tone conversational, now dripping with condescension, "if you people just listened, things wouldn't get this far. You want respect, you gotta give respect. You don't argue with the police." Thorne sat silently. He was mentally drafting the memo he would send to the Department of Justice. He was cataloging the timestamps. 11:42 a.m. unlawful arrest. 11:45 a.m. seizure of personal property without inventory. 11:50 a.m. failure to read Miranda rights. "I'm talking to you," Vance said, annoyed by the silence. "You mute now, Cat. Got your tongue? Or are you thinking about how you're going to explain that fake badge to the judge?" "Officer Vance," Thorne said, speaking for the first time since being put in the car. He had read the nameplate on the dashboard. "I am not speaking to you because anything I say can be used against me. But I will tell you this. I served this country for 30 years. I have grandchildren older than you, and the badge in your pocket is not a toy. When we get to the station, do not put it in evidence. Give it directly to the watch commander, for your own sake." Vance laughed a short, sharp bark. "Yeah, okay, Grandpa. I'll be sure to do that. Maybe they'll give you a senior discount on your bail." Vance turned up the radio, drowning out the silence, oblivious to the fact that he was driving a hearse for his own career. They arrived at the 4th precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his arm tightly, parading him past the dispatch window and into the booking area. The station smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Reynolds. Reynolds was 58, a Vietnam vet who had been a cop since the 80s. He had tired eyes, and he had seen everything. He looked up as Vance dragged Thorne in. Reynolds stiffened. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Thorne. He saw the posture. He saw the haircut. He saw the eyes. Game recognizes game. "What do we have here, Vance?" Reynolds asked, his voice wary. "Grand larceny, resisting impersonating an officer," Vance announced proudly. "Caught him stealing lumber at Builder's Depot. Tried to flash some fake federal ID to get out of it." Reynolds stood up slowly. He looked at Thorne. "Sir," Thorne looked Reynolds in the eye. "Sergeant, I am Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC retired. I am the Federal Veteran Liaison for this district. Your officer refused to check my receipt and refused to verify my credentials. He has my wallet in his pocket." The air left the room. Reynolds looked at Vance. "Vance, give me the wallet." Vance rolled his eyes. "Sarge, come on. It's a prop. It looks like—" "Give me the damn wallet, Kyle!" Reynolds roared, slamming his hand on the desk. Vance jumped, startled. He fished the wallet out and tossed it onto the counter. Reynolds opened it. He didn't just glance. He examined. He took out the ID card. He held it up to the light. He ran his thumb over the embossed seal. He looked at the secondary card. Top secret security clearance, Department of Defense. Reynolds went pale. He looked up at Thorne, then at Vance. "Vance," Reynolds said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you know what a federal liaison does?" Vance shrugged. "Coordinate parades." "They report to the cabinet," Reynolds said, his voice rising. "They have federal law enforcement authority on VA matters. This ID is real. This man is a colonel." Reynolds looked at the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists. "Uncuff him, now." Vance blinked. "But Sarge, the manager said—" "I don't give a damn what the manager said. You arrested a federal official for shopping. Get those cuffs off him before the feds come down here and turn this precinct into a parking lot." Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists where deep red grooves had formed. He didn't rub them to soothe the pain. He rubbed them to restore circulation. He looked at Vance, who was suddenly looking very small. "I want the station commander," Thorne said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. "I want a camera to photograph these injuries, and I want my phone. I need to make a call to Washington." Reynolds picked up the desk phone immediately. "Captain, you need to come down here, now. Yes, it's bad." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time Thorne left the station 3 hours later, escorted by the captain and 2 lieutenants who were profusely apologizing, the video from the parking lot had already hit the internet. White officer arrests. Black veteran with receipt. Builders Depot manager calls cops on federal agent. The optics were catastrophic. The footage showed a calm, dignified older man offering proof and a young aggressive officer escalating to violence. It showed the manager Miller smirking. It showed the receipt crumpled on the ground. By Wednesday morning, news trucks were camped out in front of the precinct. The hashtag Colonel Thorne was trending nationwide. The narrative was undeniable. A man who had defended his country abroad was treated like a criminal at home. But the real investigation unearthed the rot beneath the surface. The Internal Affairs review of Officer Vance wasn't just bad, it was damning. 6 prior complaints, all involving black men, all dismissed by his supervisors as unfounded or within policy. There was a pattern of contempt of cop arrests, Vance arresting people not for crimes but for questioning his authority. The investigation into Builders Depot was equally ruinous. Corporate headquarters panicked. They fired Brett Miller, immediately issuing a statement condemning his failure to follow protocol and gross judgmental error. But the internet doesn't forget. Former employees came forward with stories of Miller's bias, how he followed black customers, how he ignored white contractors who walked out with tools. The store's rating plummeted. People boycotted. Stocks dipped. Marcus Thorne didn't go on TV. He didn't do the talk show circuit. He hired a civil rights attorney, a shark named Eleanor Graves, and they filed a federal lawsuit. The suit named Vance the police department, the city Brett Miller, and Builders Depot. The charges were extensive. False arrest, assault, battery, defamation, civil rights violations. Malicious prosecution. The discovery phase was a nightmare for the city. Emails surfaced where Vance joked about thugs in the parking lots. Performance reviews showed his sergeant telling him to keep the stats up, but be careful with the cameras. It revealed a culture that rewarded aggression and punished de-escalation. The city attorneys took one look at Thorne's service record, his spotless federal career, and the high-definition video of the arrest, and they waved the white flag. They settled for $6.5 million. Builders Depot settled for an undisclosed amount, rumored to be in the 7 figures, along with a commitment to mandatory bias training for all 40,000 employees nationwide. Officer Kyle Vance was fired. But Thorne demanded more than just termination. As part of the settlement, the city was forced to report Vance to the National Decertification Index. He would never be a police officer again. Not in this state, not in any state. At 28, his career in law enforcement was dead. The final chapter played out in City Hall 2 months later. The city council was holding a special hearing on police reform. The room was packed. When Marcus Thorne walked to the podium, the room went silent. He wore a suit, now not work clothes. He looked every inch the statesman. "Council members," Thorne began, his voice steady. "I spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. I learned that authority without discipline is dangerous. I learned that you judge a man by his actions, not his appearance." He paused, looking at the empty chair where the police chief usually sat. The chief had resigned the week prior. "Officer Vance didn't see a colonel. He didn't see a federal liaison. He didn't even see a customer. He saw a stereotype. And because he saw a stereotype, he felt justified in stripping away my rights." Thorne leaned forward. "I have the resources to fight back. I have the badge. I have the lawyers. But what about the young man who doesn't? What about the carpenter who just wants to build a house? If this can happen to me with all my protection, what chance does an ordinary citizen have?" The room remained deadly silent. Thorne's question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. This wasn't just a story about a bad apple. It was a story about the barrel. It was about the permission structure that allowed a 29-year-old manager and a 28-year-old cop to look at a 62-year-old hero and see a threat. Justice was served, yes. The money was paid. The bad actors were removed. But as Thorne walked out of City Hall that day into the bright autumn sun, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. He felt the weight of all the times this had happened before to men who didn't have a silver star to save them. He got into his truck, the same truck from the parking lot, and drove to the veterans' housing site. The plywood was late, but the work had to continue. We have to ask ourselves, why is calm compliance so often interpreted as resistance when it comes from certain people? Should police officers be personally liable for civil rights violations? Or should the taxpayers keep footing the bill? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are difficult, but ignoring them only guarantees they will happen again. If you believe in accountability, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Stand up! Now! You're loitering and you're failing to comply.
I'm not loitering, I'm injured. This is a war memorial.
I don't care who you think you are. Get up before this gets worse.
You put hands on me again, officer, and you'll regret how wrong you are.
The command cut through the humid afternoon air like a whip crack. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't jump. He simply continued to massage the tender skin around his knee, his eyes fixed on the granite steps beneath him. He took a slow breath, counting to 3 before looking up. Standing over him, blocking the sun, was a police officer who looked like he'd been waiting all day for a fight. "I'm not sleeping, officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep gravelly rumble that carried the weight of decades of command. "I'm resting my leg. I'll be moving on in a moment." "I said get up." The officer snapped his hand, resting casually, almost eagerly on his baton. "This is a public memorial, not a homeless shelter. You're loitering, you're scaring the public, and you need to move along. Now." "I'm aware of what this is," Marcus replied, his tone remaining terrifyingly calm. "I'm a taxpayer. I'm a citizen, and I'm sitting on public property." "You're trespassing," the officer countered, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "And now you're failing to comply with a lawful order. You want to spend the afternoon in a cell, or you want to walk away?" Officer Derek Vance was 29 years old, a 4-year veteran of the force who carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed the badge granted him divinity. He was fit, aggressive, and had a haircut that was just a little too tight on the sides. In his 4 years, Vance had racked up 9 complaints. Most were for discourtesy. 2 were for excessive force. He had a reputation in the precinct, the kind of reputation that made older, wiser cops shake their heads when his name came up at roll call. He was known as a hot shot, a guy who escalated situations just to feel the rush of controlling them. He didn't see people. He saw targets. He didn't see citizens. He saw subjects. And on this particular Tuesday, he looked at Marcus Thorne, a black man in a gray hooded sweatshirt and sweatpants, sitting on the steps of the city's War Memorial Plaza, and saw nothing but a nuisance, a vagrant, a problem to be swept away so the good citizens wouldn't have to look at him. What Vance didn't see, because his bias had already painted the picture for him, was the quality of the watch on Marcus's wrist, a vintage timepiece worth more than Vance's car. He didn't notice the expensive running shoes sitting neatly beside Marcus on the step. He certainly didn't notice the rigid, unnatural angle of Marcus's right lower leg hidden beneath the sweatpants. "I'm not going to ask you again," Vance said, his voice rising, playing to the invisible audience he always felt he was performing for. "Stand up. ID now." "You're making a mistake, son," Marcus said softly. "Don't call me son. I am an officer of the law. Stand up." Before we see exactly how Officer Vance's arrogance cost the city millions, I need to ask, where are you watching from today? If you believe that respect is something that should be earned, not demanded, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories to shine a light on the truth, and your support keeps us going. To understand the magnitude of the insult taking place on those granite steps, you have to understand the man sitting on them. Marcus Thorne was 58 years old, though he moved with the power of a man 20 years younger. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't a drifter. He was a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, a man who had given 25 years of his life to the service of his country. Marcus had enlisted at 18, seeking a way out of a neighborhood that promised nothing but dead ends. He found a home in the Corps. He found disciplined purpose and a brotherhood that transcended race and background. He had served in the Gulf War in Somalia and multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a recon Marine, the tip of the spear, a man trained to survive in conditions that would break an ordinary person in hours. The injury that defined his current life happened 14 years ago in the Helmand province. An improvised explosive device. A coward's weapon buried in the dirt had detonated under his convoy. Marcus had pulled 3 men from a burning Humvee before he realized his own right leg was shattered below the knee. He didn't stop until his men were safe. That action earned him the Silver Star and a Purple Heart. It also earned him a prosthetic leg and a medical retirement he hadn't wanted. But Marcus Thorne wasn't the kind of man to sit on a porch and rust. After retiring, he utilized his top-secret clearance and decades of logistical experience to found a private security consulting firm. He worked with the Department of Defense, auditing security protocols for naval bases. He was successful, wealthy, and respected in circles that Officer Vance couldn't even get security clearance to enter. That Tuesday morning, Marcus had gone for a run. It was part of his routine, keeping the machine running, keeping the discipline alive. He had run 5 miles along the riverfront, a grueling pace for a man with a prosthetic, but he pushed himself because that was the only way he knew how to live. By the time he reached the War Memorial Plaza, the friction on his stump was becoming unbearable. The liner of his prosthetic had shifted, causing a hot, searing pain with every step. He needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to sit down, detach the lower limb, adjust the liner, and let the inflammation subside. He chose the steps of the memorial specifically because it was a place of reverence. It was a place where he, of all people, had the right to be. He sat on the warm stone surrounded by names of the fallen etched into black granite. He wasn't bothering a soul. He was a warrior taking a knee, paying silent respects while he tended to his wounds. He was in the middle of a private moment of pain and reflection when the shadow of Derek Vance fell over him. The chain of events that led Officer Vance to the plaza didn't start with police intuition. It started with a phone call from a man named Greg Miller. Greg Miller was 38 years old, a commercial real estate developer who had recently purchased the high-rise building directly across the street from the War Memorial. Greg was the definition of new money. He drove a car that cost more than a house, wore suits that were tailored in Italy, and viewed the city not as a community, but as a portfolio. Greg was currently trying to lease the ground floor retail space of his building to a high-end coffee franchise. He was obsessed with curb appeal. He wanted the area to look pristine, sanitized, and inviting to the upper-crust clientele he hoped to attract. In Greg's world, public spaces weren't for the public. They were the front lawn of his investment. From his third-floor office window, Greg had spotted Marcus sitting on the steps. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a man in expensive athletic gear. He saw a black man in a hoodie sitting idle in the middle of a workday. In Greg's biased calculation, that equaled homeless. It equaled property value risk. Greg watched Marcus for exactly 2 minutes before his impatience boiled over. He didn't go down to ask if the man was okay. He didn't consider that the man might be resting. He picked up his phone and dialed 911, knowing exactly what keywords to use to get a quick response. 911. What is your emergency? Yes, this is Greg Miller calling from the Miller Building on 4th. There's a vagrant on the War Memorial steps. He's been there for an hour. A lie. It had been 4 minutes. He's harassing people walking by. He looks unstable, possibly intoxicated. He's yelling at women passing by. Another lie. Marcus hadn't spoken a word to anyone, but Greg knew that loitering might get a slow response. Harassing women and unstable would bring the cavalry. Is he armed? The dispatcher asked. I don't know, Greg said, dropping his voice to sound concerned. He's got a big bag with him. He keeps reaching into it. Honestly, it's making my tenants very nervous. We can't have this kind of element threatening people in broad daylight. We'll send a unit right away, sir. The call went out over the radio. Dispatch to Unit 4 Alpha. Suspicious person at the War Memorial. Male black-gray hoodie. Caller states subject is harassing pedestrians, possibly intoxicated, acting erratic. Caller is a local business owner. Officer Vance picked up the mic. 4 Alpha, show me en route. Vance smiled as he turned the wheel of his cruiser. He loved these calls. They were easy. Clean up the streets, assert some dominance, maybe get a quick arrest if the guy got mouthy. He didn't verify the information. He didn't plan to observe the subject first. He had the narrative in his head, erratic, drunk, aggressive vagrant. When Vance pulled up to the curb, he didn't see a calm man adjusting his leg. He saw the enemy Greg Miller had fabricated. And because Vance was the kind of officer who believed every civilian complaint that aligned with his worldview, he walked up those steps ready for war. The sun was beating down on the limestone steps, the heat radiating off the stone. It was a beautiful, clear day, the kind of day that usually made people cheerful. But Officer Derek Vance wasn't cheerful. He was agitated. He stomped up the steps, his boots heavy and loud. As he approached Marcus, his internal monologue was running a mile a minute. Look at him, middle of the day wearing sweats, probably high on something. Thinks he owns the place. Not on my watch. I'm not going to ask you again. Vance repeated, his voice echoing off the memorial walls. Stand up. ID now. Marcus looked at the officer. Really looked at him. He saw the dilated pupils of an adrenaline junkie. He saw the hand twitching near the holster. He recognized the signs of a man who had lost control of his own temper. Officer, Marcus said, keeping his hands visible on his knees. I'm not refusing to identify myself, but my wallet is in my gym bag, which is right there. If I reach for it, I don't want you getting nervous. I don't get nervous, Vance sneered. I get reactive. You keep your hands where I can see them. Why are you even here? This is a memorial for soldiers, not a hangout spot for bums. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. That one stung. I know who this memorial is for. I have friends on this wall. Vance laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Yeah, I bet. You and every other guy with a cardboard sign has a buddy on the wall. Listen, pal, I don't have time for your fairy tales. You're making people uncomfortable. We got calls that you're harassing women. That is a lie, Marcus said firmly. I haven't spoken to a soul. I've been here 10 minutes fixing a medical issue with my leg. You're drunk, Vance stated, not asking but declaring. I can see it in your eyes, glossy, slurring your words. Marcus spoke with the precise clipped diction of a senior NCO. He was about as drunk as a judge. I am sober, I am injured, and you are harassing a private citizen on public property. Okay, that's it. Vance stepped back and unclipped his radio, but he didn't call for backup. He just wanted to look busy. You're detained, loitering, public intoxication, and failure to obey a lawful order. Detained. Marcus shifted his weight, wincing as the raw skin on his stump rubbed against the carbon fiber socket. On what reasonable suspicion, being black on a sunny day? Watch your mouth. Vance pointed a finger in Marcus's face. You don't play the race card with me. This is about you breaking the law. Now stand up before I drag you up. I can't just stand up quickly. Marcus explained, his patience wearing thin. My prosthetic is loose. I need to tighten the strap or I'm going to fall. If you give me 30 seconds... I'm done listening to your excuses, Vance yelled. He reached out and grabbed the fabric of Marcus's hoodie. Get up, Vance yanked. Marcus, a man who weighed 220 pounds of solid muscle, didn't budge easily, but the sudden motion threw him off balance. He instinctively put a hand back to brace himself. Resisting, Vance shouted. Stop resisting. I am not resisting, Marcus roared, his voice finally rising to match the officer's volume. I am trying to keep my balance. The physical contact changed the energy in the plaza instantly. Passers-by stopped. Phones came out. A woman near the fountain turned her stroller around to watch. A businessman in a suit paused, holding his briefcase with both hands. Marcus stabilized himself and looked Vance dead in the eye. You put your hands on me again, officer, and we are going to have a very different conversation. I am a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. I have a prosthetic leg because I left the real one in Helmand Province. Now back off. Vance froze for a split second. The words were specific. The tone was commanding. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. But then his ego took the wheel again. He looked at the sweatpants. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the skin color. And he decided it was impossible. Stolen valor. Vance spat the words out like poison. That's a felony in some places, you know. Lying about service, you make me sick. You guys are all the same. You learn a few words like Helmand and Master Sergeant and think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. Marcus felt a cold rage settle in his chest. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the icy calm of combat. You think I'm lying. I know you're lying. Vance smirked. I've seen real Marines. They don't look like you. They don't lounge around on steps scaring people. You're a grifter. A homeless grifter trying to steal honor you didn't earn. Check my bag, Marcus said, nodding toward the duffel bag. My ID is in the side pocket, the blue wallet. Open it. I'm not touching your dirty bag, Vance said. Probably got needles in it. Then let me get it. No. Vance's hand went to his taser. You don't reach for anything. You're done. You're going in. I'm taking you in for stolen valor, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. You are making a career-ending mistake, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low warning. If you arrest me, you better be right. Because if you're wrong, if you are arresting a disabled veteran for sitting on a memorial dedicated to his brothers, there is no hole deep enough for you to hide in. Vance laughed. He actually laughed. Is that a threat? Add threatening an officer to the list. Turn around, hands behind your back. I can't balance well if you... Turn around. Vance lunged. He didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed Marcus's left arm and twisted it behind his back with force that was entirely unnecessary. Marcus grunted pain shooting through his shoulder, an old rotator cuff injury from 2004 flaring up. I am not resisting, Marcus announced loudly, looking directly at a teenager filming with an iPhone. I am complying. This officer is using excessive force on a disabled veteran. Shut up. Vance cranked the arm higher. Get on the ground, stomach now. I cannot get on my stomach, Marcus yelled. My leg doesn't bend that way. Stop fighting me. Vance kicked Marcus's right leg, the prosthetic one. The hollow thud of the boot hitting carbon fiber should have been a clue. It should have been the moment Vance realized he was wrong. But the sound didn't register. Vance just thought the guy was wearing padding. He swept Marcus's legs. Marcus went down hard, his face hitting the granite step. His glasses skittered across the stone. The crowd was audibly gasping now. Hey! He said he's disabled, a woman shouted from the sidewalk. Back up! Vance screamed at the crowd, pulling his taser with his free hand and pointing it at the witnesses. Back the hell up or you're all going to jail for obstruction. He holstered the taser and dropped his knee into the center of Marcus's back. He grabbed Marcus's other wrist and forced them together. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. Marcus lay on the cold stone, his cheek pressed against the grit. He stopped speaking. He stopped moving. He went into survival mode. He cataloged everything. The time, 2:15 p.m. The officer's nameplate. D. Vance. The badge number, 4922. The pain in his stump was agonizing, a sharp, biting throb, where the impact had twisted the socket. "You got anything on you?" Vance panted, patting down Marcus's pockets roughly. He found a phone, a set of keys, expensive car keys. He pulled them out and looked at the Mercedes logo, frowned, and shoved them into his own pocket. "Probably stole the car, too." "My bag?" Marcus said from the ground. "Do not leave my bag." "I'm taking your trash," Vance grunted. He hauled Marcus up. Because Marcus couldn't use his leg properly, he stumbled. Vance interpreted this as more resistance and shoved him toward the patrol car. Marcus hopped on his good leg, dragged by the handcuffs, humiliated in front of 50 people. He was a man who had led platoons into battle. He was a man who advised generals. And now he was being manhandled by a 29-year-old with a badge and a god complex. Vance threw him into the back of the cruiser. The space was cramped. Marcus had to twist his body to accommodate his prosthetic, which was now completely misaligned. Vance slammed the door and walked back to grab the gym bag. He threw it into the trunk. He didn't look inside. He didn't want to know. He got into the driver's seat, sweating, pumped full of adrenaline. "You're in big trouble, pal," Vance said, catching Marcus's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Stolen valor. I hate guys like you." Marcus stared back, his expression unreadable. "You should have checked the bag, Officer Vance." "Shut up." The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Marcus spent every second of it memorizing the route, the speed, the officer's demeanor. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an intelligence officer gathering data, and he knew exactly how to use it. When they pulled into the sally port of the precinct, Vance was still riding his high. He hauled Marcus out of the car. "Walk," Vance ordered. "I'm limping," Marcus corrected. "Because you damaged my prosthetic." "Tell it to the judge." They walked into the station processing area. It was busy. Officers were booking suspects, typing reports, drinking coffee. The desk sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller, no relation to the caller, a 60-year-old grizzly bear of a man who had been a cop since the late 80s. He was 2 weeks away from retirement. He had seen everything. Vance marched Marcus up to the desk. "Got a live one, Sarge. Loitering, public intoxication, resisting, and stolen valor. Guy was sleeping on the war memorial steps. Claimed he was a Marine Master Sergeant." Vance chuckled. "Doesn't have a shred of ID on him." Sergeant Miller looked up from his paperwork. He looked at Vance. Then he looked at Marcus. Miller's eyes went wide. He stood up slowly. "Marcus," Miller said, his voice confused. "Marcus Thorne." Officer Vance froze. He looked at the sergeant, then back at Marcus. You know this guy, Sarge. He's a frequent flyer." Sergeant Miller ignored Vance completely. He came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Get those cuffs off him, now." "Sarge, he's a vagrant. He was resisting." "I said get them off!" Miller roared, his voice shaking the glass partitions of the booking room. The entire room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists, his face stoic. "I apologize, Marcus." Sergeant Miller said, his face pale. "Are you okay?" "My prosthetic is damaged, Tom," Marcus said calmly. "And I believe I have a bruised rib, but otherwise I'm fine." "Prosthetic," Vance whispered. He looked down at Marcus's sweatpants. "Where is his property?" Miller barked at Vance. In the trunk. His bag." "Go get it. Run." Vance ran. He came back 30 seconds later with the gym bag. He put it on the counter. "Open it," Marcus said to Vance. "Side pocket. Blue wallet." Vance unzipped the bag. His fingers found the wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a standard driver's license. Marcus Thorne. Address in the wealthiest district of the city. The second thing he saw was a blue ID card. Department of Defense. Retired military. Rank Master Sergeant E8. The third thing he saw was a white access badge. Level 5 security clearance. Pentagon access contractor. Vance felt the blood drain from his face. He felt like he was falling. "Read it out loud," Miller commanded. "Master Sergeant, Marcus Thorne." Vance stammered. "Keep reading," Miller said. The card behind it. Vance pulled out a folded piece of paper that was tucked behind the ID. It was a laminated card. "Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart recipient." Vance dropped the wallet on the counter. It hit the surface with a slap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You arrested a Silver Star recipient," Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "For sitting on a war memorial. You accused him of stolen valor." He didn't show me. I thought—" Vance was hyperventilating. "I tried to show you," Marcus said, his voice cutting through Vance's panic. "I told you exactly who I was. I told you I was injured. I told you I was resting. You didn't hear me because you didn't want to hear me. You saw a black man in a hoodie and you decided I was trash." The precinct captain, a stern woman named Captain Reynolds, had emerged from her office at the sound of the shouting. She walked over, picked up the ID cards, and looked at Vance. "Badge and gun," she said simply. "Captain, I was following a call. Badge and gun on the desk. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. You don't touch a suspect. You don't drive a car. You don't even look at a uniform until I say so." Vance unholstered his weapon with trembling hands. He unpinned his badge. He placed them next to the wallet of the man he had tormented. "Mr. Thorne," Captain Reynolds said, turning to Marcus, "I cannot express how sorry I am. We will drive you to the hospital immediately to have your leg checked. We will have your car retrieved. And I personally guarantee you that this will be handled with the utmost severity." Marcus looked at Vance, who was now just a 29-year-old man in a t-shirt stripped of his power. "I don't want your apology, Captain," Marcus said. "I want his job, and I want the man who called 911. The video hit the internet 3 hours later. The teenager who filmed it captioned it, "Cop beats up disabled vet for sitting down." By evening, it had 3 million views. By the next morning, it was on every national news network. The image of Officer Vance kneeing a man in the back while he screamed about his prosthetic leg was played on loop. The audio of Marcus calmly identifying himself as a Marine, followed by Vance mocking him with stolen valor, sparked a nationwide outrage that crossed all political lines. Veterans groups descended on the city. Protesters filled the plaza where the arrest happened. The hashtag Stand With Marcus trended for a week. The investigation was swift because the evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage from Vance confirmed everything Marcus said. It showed the bias, the aggression, the refusal to look at ID, and the excessive force. Greg Miller, the real estate developer, tried to hide. But the 911 call was released. His voice claiming Marcus was harassing women and drunk was played side by side with the video showing Marcus sitting silently. It was proof of a false report. The internet detectives found Greg's business within hours. His tenants, horrified by the association, broke their leases. The high-end coffee shop he was wooing pulled out of the deal. Greg Miller's curb appeal obsession ended up costing him his reputation and nearly his business. He was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor, but the social penalty was a life sentence. Officer Derek Vance was fired 4 weeks later. The review board found he had violated 14 separate department policies. He was stripped of his law enforcement certification, meaning he could never be a cop again in that state. He was also charged criminally with assault and battery under color of authority. He avoided jail time by taking a plea deal that included 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service he had to perform at a veterans hospital. The city knew they couldn't win a lawsuit. They settled with Marcus Thorne for $6.5 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a wrongful arrest in the city's history. Marcus didn't keep the money. He used $6.5 million to start a legal defense fund for veterans who had been mistreated by police. He named it the Honor and Dignity Fund. 6 months later, Marcus returned to the War Memorial Plaza. He was wearing a suit. He walked with a slight limp. The damage to his prosthetic socket had required a new fitting, and it still wasn't quite right. He stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the spot where he had been handcuffed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just tired. He realized that for men like Vance and Miller, his service didn't matter. His sacrifice didn't matter. The only thing they respected was power, and he had been forced to use his to remind them of his humanity. It's a hard truth to swallow, isn't it? That a man can give his leg for his country, can carry the scars of war for a lifetime, and still be treated like a criminal in his own hometown just because he wanted to sit down for 5 minutes. It makes you wonder if a Silver Star recipient isn't safe from this kind of bias who is... We talk a lot about supporting our troops in this country. We put stickers on our cars and fly flags on our porches. But true support isn't a slogan. True support is respecting the dignity of the men and women who served even when they aren't wearing a uniform, even when they're just a black man in a hoodie sitting on a step. Officer Vance thought he was protecting the city. In reality, he was attacking the very values that Marcus Thorne had bled to defend. What do you think? Should there be a mandatory national registry for officers fired for misconduct so they can't just move to the next town? And should making a false 911 call based on race be a federal hate crime? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, please share it. The more we talk about this, the harder it becomes for it to happen again. Until next time, take care of each other.
Step away from the car, now! I'm paying a parking meter, that's not a crime. Don't test me, I need your ID. You don't have cause. You're crossing a line. I decide where the line is. No, officer. The Constitution does.
The command didn't come as a question. It was a bark sharp and aggressive cutting through the humid afternoon air of downtown Atlanta. The street was alive with the sounds of the city tires humming on asphalt, the distant rhythm of a jackhammer, and the low murmur of pedestrians enjoying a sunny Tuesday lunch hour. But inside the bubble of tension that had just formed on the corner of Peachtree and 10th, everything went silent. Officer Kyle Vance stood with his hand resting dangerously close to his holster, his chest puffed out eyes concealed behind mirrored aviator sunglasses. At 29 years old, Vance still carried the physical bulk of a former high school linebacker, but his posture betrayed something more volatile than athleticism. It was the posture of a man who believed his badge granted him dominion over everyone he encountered. A man who viewed the citizens of his precinct not as people to serve, but as subjects to control. Vance had been on this force for 6 years, a tenure marked by a troubling pattern that the department had managed to bury under the guise of proactive policing. His file was thick with complaints, 14 of them to be exact. 11 of those complaints involved allegations of racial profiling, aggressive language, or unconstitutional stops of black men. He was known in the locker room as a hunter, a term some of the older, more cynical officers used with a wink. Vance didn't patrol, he prowled. He looked for trouble where there was none confident that if he shook a tree hard enough, something criminal would fall out. Today, the tree he decided to shake was standing calmly next to a silver 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "I said step away from the meter," Vance shouted again, closing the distance between them with long, heavy strides. "Hands where I can see them." The man at the meter didn't flinch. He didn't jump, he didn't run, and he didn't look afraid. He simply finished turning the dial on the parking meter, listened for the mechanical click of the coin dropping, and then slowly turned to face the shouting officer. Elias Thorne was a mountain of a man, even at 62 years old. Standing 6'3" with shoulders that still spanned a doorframe, he wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit that cost more than Officer Vance made in a month. His tie was silk, a deep maroon perfectly knotted against a crisp white shirt. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine reflecting the midday sun. But it was his face that held the real power. Weather-beaten, etched with lines of deep experience, and eyes that held a calm, terrifying stillness. "I heard you the first time, officer," Thorne said. His voice was a deep baritone steady as bedrock. It was the voice of a man who had issued commands that sent thousands of men into battle, not a man used to being barked at by a 20-something with an ego problem. "There is no need to shout. I am simply paying for parking." To Kyle Vance, this calmness was not a sign of innocence. It was a sign of arrogance. In Vance's distorted worldview, a black man, any black man standing next to a $130,000 car in a high-end district was suspicious. If he wasn't the driver, he was a thief. If he was the driver, he was probably a drug dealer or a fraudster. And if he wasn't afraid of the police, he was definitely hiding something. "I didn't ask you what you were doing," Vance sneered, stepping into Thorne's personal space, a tactic taught to intimidate. He could smell the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and old leather on the older man, which only irritated him more. "I told you to step away. We've got reports of people tampering with meters in this area, and loitering. You fit the description." There was no report of tampering. There was no description. Vance was improvising as he had done dozens of times before. He was fishing for a reaction, waiting for the man to get angry, to curse, to make a sudden move, anything that would justify what Vance wanted to do next. Thorne looked down at the officer, his expression unreadable. "I fit the description of a man paying for parking, officer. I have an appointment in 10 minutes. I have placed 2 quarters in this meter. That is the extent of my activity here." "Don't get smart with me, pal." Vance snapped his finger, twitching near his belt. "You're detained. And until I figure out why you're really standing next to a car that clearly doesn't belong to you, you aren't going anywhere." Vance had no idea who he was talking to. He saw a stereotype. He didn't see the silver star pin on Thorne's lapel. He didn't see the scars on the man's hands from shrapnel in Somalia. He didn't see the discipline of a command sergeant major who had retired after 35 years of distinguished service in the United States Army Rangers. Officer Vance thought he was catching a criminal. In reality, he was walking into a buzzsaw. To understand the gravity of the mistake Officer Vance was making, one had to understand the history standing inside that charcoal suit. Elias Thorne was not merely a retiree enjoying a Tuesday afternoon. He was a living institution. Born in a segregated hospital in Alabama in the early 1960s, Thorne had learned the value of discipline and dignity from a father who laid bricks and a mother who taught school. He enlisted in the Army at 18, seeking a way out and a way up. He found more than a career. He found a calling. The Ranger Creed, "I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy," became the DNA of his existence. He had earned his Ranger tab in the mud and misery of Fort Benning when he was just 19. By 30, he was a platoon sergeant. He had jumped into Panama during Operation Just Cause, surviving a firefight that claimed 2 of his best friends. In Mogadishu during the chaos of 1993, that the world would come to know through movies, Thorne was there on the ground dragging a wounded pilot to safety while taking a bullet to the shoulder, an injury that still ached when it rained like it had earlier that morning. He had served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, rising to the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank a soldier can achieve. He was the man generals consulted when they needed to know the truth about the morale of the troops. He was the man who ensured that thousands of young soldiers came home alive. When he retired 5 years ago, he didn't stop serving. He moved to Atlanta and began working tirelessly on veterans advocacy, using his connections and his commanding presence to secure housing and mental health funding for those the system had forgotten. Today, Elias Thorne was not loitering. He was 30 minutes early for a lunch meeting with Mayor Franklin and the City Council regarding the construction of a new rehabilitation center for disabled veterans. The Mercedes S-Class was a retirement gift to himself, paid for with decades of saved combat pay and wise investments. He had arrived early because Elias Thorne was never late. "If you're on time, you're late," he used to tell his troops. He had parked on the street because the garage was full. He had walked to the meter because he believed in following the law down to the letter. He had a handicap placard in his glove box that legally allowed him to park for free at metered spots in the city, a concession for his service-connected disabilities, but Thorne rarely used it. He preferred to pay his way. He didn't like handouts, even the ones he was entitled to. So he had fished 2 quarters out of his pocket, inserted them, and checked the time. That was the moment Officer Vance's patrol car had screeched to a halt. Thorne looked at the young officer and felt a familiar cold disappointment. He had fought for this country for 3.5 decades. He had bled for the Constitution that this boy was treating like a suggestion. He had seen young men like Vance before in uniform in war zones. They were the dangerous ones, the ones who loved the power of the rifle but lacked the discipline of the mission. In a combat zone, men like Vance got their squads killed. On the streets of Atlanta, they destroyed communities. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, a tone he used to use to dress down chaotic lieutenants. "I am going to ask you to take a breath and reassess this situation. You are making an assumption based on optics, and it is an incorrect one." "I don't need a lecture from the likes of you," Vance spat back. "I need ID now." "I have broken no law," Thorne stated calmly. "Under Georgia law, unless you have reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to present identification. Paying for a parking meter is not a crime." It wasn't defiance. It was a lesson. Thorne was trying to give the boy an off-ramp, a chance to walk away with his career intact. But Vance was too blinded by the reflection in his own sunglasses to see the cliff he was driving off. Unknown to Thorne, the poison in Vance's ear hadn't just come from his own prejudice. It had started 3 minutes earlier with a phone call from across the street. Directly across the street from where Thorne stood behind the display window of Gantry's Rare Antiquities, stood Preston Gantry. At 45, Gantry was a man who considered himself the unspoken guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. He dealt in 18th-century French furniture and colonial silverware, catering to a clientele that was exclusively wealthy and overwhelmingly white. Gantry had been watching the street when the silver Mercedes pulled up. He saw the car first, beautiful, sleek, expensive, a car that belonged in front of his shop. But when the door opened and Elias Thorne stepped out, Gantry's expression soured. He didn't see a retired war hero. He didn't see a potential customer. Gantry saw a threat. He saw a large black man in a neighborhood that Gantry felt was changing too fast. He watched Thorne walk to the meter and pause, checking his pockets for change. "Look at this," Gantry muttered to no one, his hands tightening on the velvet curtain he was adjusting. "Probably casing the sedan, or trying to jam the meter to steal coins. They're getting bolder every day." It was a ludicrous thought. Who would wear a $3,000 suit to steal quarters from a parking meter? But prejudice is rarely logical. It is a story the mind invents to justify hate. Gantry convinced himself in seconds that Thorne was a criminal element. He grabbed the phone behind his counter and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, this is Preston Gantry, owner of Gantry's Antiquities on Peachtree. I need an officer here immediately. There's a suspicious individual loitering outside my shop." "Is he threatening anyone, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "He's aggressive." Gantry lied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's wandering around a luxury vehicle tampering with the parking meter. He looks like he's trying to break into the car. He's been out there for 20 minutes just watching people. It's making my customers uncomfortable." Thorne had been there for less than 2 minutes. Description: African-American male, large build, very large. He looks like he could be armed. He's got his hands in his pockets, looking around nervously. "Please send someone before he smashes a window or hurts someone." "We have a unit around the corner, sir. Officer Vance is responding." Gantry hung up the phone with a satisfied smirk. He felt powerful. He had done his part to keep the neighborhood safe. He watched through the glass as Officer Vance's cruiser whipped around the corner and slammed on the brakes. He watched Vance storm out. He watched the confrontation begin. "Get him," Gantry whispered, rubbing his hands together. He didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the removal of the man who didn't fit his picture of the world. He wanted Thorne gone humiliated and put in his place. From his air-conditioned vantage point, Gantry watched the scene unfold like a play he had directed. He saw the officer shouting. He saw the black man standing his ground. Gantry frowned. Why isn't he cowering? Why isn't he running? The lack of fear in the suspect made Gantry nervous. It made him feel like perhaps he had miscalculated. But it was too late now. The machinery of the state had been activated, and it was rolling forward with crushing weight. Back on the sidewalk, the air was crackling with static energy. Officer Vance's face was flushing a deep red, the color of anger and embarrassment. He was used to fear. He was used to people stammering, apologizing, and handing over their wallets with shaking hands. Elias Thorne's absolute concrete stillness was infuriating him. "I'm going to tell you one more time." Vance set his hand, unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw the firearm, but the threat was unmistakable. "ID now, or you're going for a ride." Thorne looked at the officer's hand on the weapon. He calculated the distance, the stance, the reaction time. In his prime, Thorne could have disarmed Vance, stripped the weapon, and had the boy on his stomach in under 3 seconds. Even now, with his stiff shoulder, he knew he could end the physical threat. But Elias Thorne operated under a code of honor, and more importantly, he knew that fighting a police officer physically was a death sentence for a black man in America, regardless of the truth. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice hard as flint, "you are escalating a consensual encounter into a detention without probable cause. I have told you this is my vehicle. I am adding time to the meter. If you run the plates, you will see the vehicle is registered to Elias Thorne. That is me. I'm not running anything until I have your license in my hand," Vance shouted, stepping closer. "And how do I know you didn't steal the keys? How do I know you aren't just the driver waiting for the boss?" "The boss?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. The insult was so petty, so archaic. "I am the boss, son, and I suggest you lower your voice before you say something you cannot take back." "Don't call me son," Vance roared. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, show me 10 to 15 with one uncooperative male subject at Peachtree and 10th. Send backup. Subject is large, potentially hostile." "Hostile," Thorne repeated, shaking his head slowly. "I have not moved. I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened you. You are manufacturing a narrative to justify your own bias." "Turn around," Vance ordered, pulling his taser from his vest with his left hand while keeping his right near his gun. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." "For what crime?" Thorne demanded, still not moving. "Failure to obey a lawful order, obstruction, disorderly conduct. Take your pick." Vance was making it up as he went along, throwing out charges like confetti, hoping one would stick. "Those are secondary charges," Thorne said, his mind working like a legal scholar. "You cannot arrest me for obstruction if there was no underlying crime to obstruct. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." I don't care about your amendments right now. I care about my safety. Vance lied. He wasn't unsafe. He was insecure. Your safety is not in danger, Thorne said. But your career is. That broke the dam. Vance couldn't handle the intellectual dressing down. He couldn't handle the fact that this suspect was smarter, calmer, and more articulate than he was. He holstered the taser and lunged forward, grabbing Thorne's left wrist, the bad shoulder. Vance yanked the arm backward with excessive force, using a joint manipulation technique meant to inflict pain and force compliance. Thorne gasped a sharp intake of breath as white-hot pain shot through his rotator cuff, the old shrapnel wound screaming in protest. But he didn't fight back. He didn't pull away. He knew that any resistance, even a reflex to pain, would be written up as assault on an officer. I am not resisting, Thorne said loudly, his voice straining through the pain. I am complying. Do not hyperextend the shoulder. Stop fighting me, Vance yelled for the benefit of the body camera, despite Thorne standing perfectly still. Stop resisting. The metal cuffs bit into Elias Thorne's wrists with a cold, mechanical finality. Officer Vance didn't just apply them. He ratcheted them down tight, pinching the skin, twisting Thorne's arms high up his back to maximize the discomfort. By now, a crowd had gathered. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the spectacle of a white police officer manhandling an impeccably dressed elderly black man had stopped traffic on the sidewalk. Phones were out, dozens of them. The unblinking eyes of the digital age were recording every second. Hey, take it easy on him, a woman in business attire shouted from near the bakery. He wasn't doing anything. Back up! Vance screamed at the crowd, spinning Thorne around so forcefully that the older man stumbled slightly. Back the hell up or you're next. A young man in a blue suit stepped forward, holding his phone high. Officer, I'm an attorney. I've been watching for 5 minutes. He has complied with every order. You are using excessive force. Did I ask for a lawyer? Vance sneered, adrenaline flooding his system. He felt like a gladiator in the arena. Walk away. Vance pushed Thorne toward the patrol car. Thorne walked with his head high despite the pain radiating from his shoulder and the tightness of the cuffs cutting into his circulation. He looked at the crowd not with shame, but with a gaze of intense, focused gravity. He locked eyes with the young lawyer filming him. Record it all, Thorne said clearly. Do not stop recording. Shut up. Vance grunted, shoving Thorne against the side of the cruiser. He patted Thorne down roughly, his hands searching the pockets of the expensive suit. He pulled out a wallet. He didn't open it to check the ID yet. He just shoved it into his own pocket, treating it like evidence of a crime. He pulled out the car keys. Into the car, Vance ordered, opening the back door. The space was cramped, a cage of hard plastic and metal mesh. Thorne paused before ducking his head. He turned to look Vance directly in the eyes. The sunglasses were inches apart. Officer Vance, Thorne said, reading the nameplate on the uniform. You have the authority to do this, but you do not have the right. You are about to destroy your life because you could not control your prejudice. Get in. Vance shoved him. Thorne's head bumped against the doorframe, a deliberate move by police known as a rough ride tactic, but Thorne absorbed the impact without a sound. He maneuvered his large frame into the back seat, his knees pressed against the partition. Vance slammed the door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Inside the car, the air was stale and smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat. Thorne sat in the dark, his hands numb behind his back. He closed his eyes for a moment, regulating his breathing. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. The combat breathing technique calmed his heart rate. He was a prisoner of war in his own country. It was a feeling he had feared he might one day experience, but had hoped his service would insulate him from. He was wrong. The uniform he had worn for 35 years meant nothing to Kyle Vance. The medals meant nothing. The rank meant nothing. All that mattered was the color of his skin. Vance jumped into the driver's seat, revving the engine aggressively. He picked up his radio. Dispatch 1 in custody, transporting to precinct. Suspect was combative but is now secured. Tow the vehicle at the scene. Thorne opened his eyes. Tow the vehicle. They were going to impound his car. The pettiness was almost impressive. "You're making a mistake, son," Thorne said from the back, his voice calm. "I told you," Vance said, glancing in the rearview mirror with a smirk. "Don't call me son. You're just another thug in a suit to me." Thorne fell silent. There was nothing more to say to Kyle Vance. The time for talking was over. The time for judgment was coming. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. For Officer Vance, it was a victory lap. He blasted the air conditioning and hummed along to the radio, feeling the rush of a good bust. He was already mentally writing his report, phrasing it in the language of exoneration. Subject exhibited pre-assault cues. Subject bladed his stance. Subject refused lawful commands. He knew the buzzwords that made internal affairs investigations go away. For Elias Thorne, the drive was an intelligence-gathering mission. He stared out the window, memorizing the route. He noted Vance's driving reckless speeding without lights or sirens rolling through a stop sign. He listened to Vance's casual profanity on the phone with another officer. "Yeah, I got a big one. Thought he owned the block. Yeah, Mercedes. Probably a drug dealer's ride. We'll inventory it later, see what kind of cash is in the trunk." Thorne cataloged every word. He wasn't afraid. He was angry, a cold, focused, righteous anger that burned hotter than any fire. He thought about the men he had led. He thought about the boys who died in the desert so that people in Atlanta could have freedom. He thought about the irony of being treated like an enemy combatant in the city he helped build. They arrived at the precinct, a fortress of brick and concrete. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rattling shut behind them. "Out," Vance ordered, opening the back door. He grabbed Thorne's arm again, hauling him out. Thorne's legs were stiff, but he stood tall. Vance marched him through the booking doors, pushing him toward the front desk. The station was busy. Officers were typing reports, phones were ringing. The hum of bureaucracy was constant. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was 58 years old, a relic of the old breed of police work. He had tired eyes and a mustache that had gone gray a decade ago. He was a Marine Corps veteran of the First Gulf War. He knew the streets, and he knew his officers. He didn't like Vance. He thought Vance was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "What you got, Vance?" Kowalski asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Disorderly obstruction resisting." Vance rattled off, pushing Thorne toward the bench. "Guy was checking meters, casing cars. Refused ID, got aggressive." Kowalski looked up, his eyes scanning the suspect. He saw the suit. He saw the posture. He saw the face. Kowalski stopped chewing his gum. He squinted. He stood up slowly behind the desk. "Vance?" Kowalski said, his voice changing tone completely. "Bring him here." "I'm taking him to holding Sarge. I gotta process him." "I said bring him here," Kowalski barked. Vance frowned, confused, but shoved Thorne toward the desk. Thorne looked at the sergeant. He saw the Marine Corps lapel pin on Kowalski's uniform shirt. "Semper Fi, Sergeant," Thorne said softly. Kowalski's eyes went wide. He looked at Thorne's face, then at the tattoo peeking out from the cuff of Thorne's shirt where the sleeve had ridden up during the struggle. It was a Ranger tab tattoo, faded but distinct. Then recognition hit Kowalski like a physical blow. He had seen this man's picture on the internal memo just that morning. He was the VIP guest speaker for the department's Veterans Day Gala. He was the man the chief of police was currently having lunch with, or supposed to be having lunch with. "Oh, dear God," Kowalski whispered. He looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and horror. "Vance, take the cuffs off." "What? No, he's under arrest. I have to print him." "Vance," Kowalski shouted, slamming his hand on the desk, silencing the entire room. "Take the cuffs off right now. Do you have any idea who this is?" "He's a loiterer," Vance insisted, though a seed of doubt finally began to sprout in his gut. "This is Command Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, retired," Kowalski said, his voice trembling with rage. "He is a Silver Star recipient, and he is Chief Harrison's personal guest." Vance froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. He looked at the man he had manhandled. He looked at the thug in the suit. Thorne didn't smile. He just stared at Vance. "I tried to tell you, son." The silence in the precinct was shattered by the sound of the front doors bursting open. Chief of Police Marcus Harrison didn't walk in. He stormed in. Behind him was Mayor Franklin, looking equally flushed and furious. They had been waiting at the restaurant for 20 minutes. When Thorne didn't show, the mayor had called Thorne's cell phone. A bystander, the young lawyer, had answered it, having picked it up from the sidewalk where Vance had knocked it out of Thorne's hand. The lawyer had told the chief everything. "Where is he?" Chief Harrison roared. Kowalski pointed to the bench where Thorne was sitting, rubbing his wrists. Vance was standing nearby, looking like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. Chief Harrison, a tall man in his late 50s, rushed over to Thorne. Elias, are you all right?" Thorne stood up slowly, wincing as he moved his shoulder. "I'll survive, Marcus. I've had worse days in Kandahar." Harrison turned to Vance. The look on the chief's face was enough to wither a plant. "Officer Vance, step forward." Vance stepped forward, his knees shaking. "Chief, He refused to identify." "He was tampering." "Silence," Harrison yelled. "I don't want to hear a single word from your mouth unless it is 'I resign.' You arrested a decorated war hero for putting quarters in a parking meter." "He fit the description," Vance stammered. "What description?" Harrison demanded, stepping into Vance's face. "The description of a black man existing in public. I saw the video, Vance. It's already online. 2 million views in 20 minutes. I saw you shove him. I saw you twist his arm. I heard him tell you he was complying." The mayor stepped forward, his face grim. "Officer, you have humiliated this city. You have assaulted a man who has done more for this country in one day than you have in your entire life." Vance looked around for support. He looked at the other officers. Everyone was looking away. No one was going to jump on this grenade for him. The blue wall of silence had crumbled under the weight of sheer incompetence and stupidity. I followed protocol," Vance whispered weakly. "You violated the Fourth Amendment, the department's de-escalation policy, and basic human decency," Harrison said. He reached out his hand. "Badge. Gun. Now." Vance's hands trembled as he unholstered his weapon and unpinned his badge. He placed them in the chief's hand. "You are relieved of duty pending an internal investigation," Harrison said. "Get out of my station." Vance turned and walked toward the door. He wasn't the strutting rooster anymore. He was a small, broken man. As he pushed through the doors, he saw the crowd of reporters already gathering outside. Harrison turned back to Thorne. "Elias, I am so sorry. We will drop all charges immediately. We'll get you to a doctor for that shoulder." Thorne adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the chief. "The charges aren't the problem, Marcus. The problem is that if I wasn't who I am, if I was just a 19-year-old kid from the South Side, I'd still be in that cell, and no one would be coming to get me." The room went quiet. Thorne's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "We have work to do," Thorne said. "But first I want my keys back, and I believe my meter has expired." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The video of the arrest didn't just go viral, it became a global headline. "Retired Ranger arrested for parking while black." The image of Elias Thorne, dignified and calm, being shoved by the snarling Officer Vance, became a symbol of the broken trust between police and the community. Officer Kyle Vance was fired 3 days later. The internal investigation was the fastest in the department's history. His black file of previous complaints was leaked to the press, exposing a system that had protected a bad apple for far too long. He was charged with assault and violation of oath of office. He lost his pension, his career, and his reputation. Preston Gantry, the antique shop owner, faced his own reckoning. The 911 call was released. His lies about Thorne casing cars and being aggressive were exposed as pure fabrication born of racism. The internet descended on Gantry's antiquities. Within a week, the shop had 50,000 one-star reviews. Protesters stood outside his glass window day and night. 2 months later, Gantry filed for bankruptcy and closed the shop. He learned that the community he thought he was protecting wanted nothing to do with him. The city of Atlanta settled with Elias Thorne for $6 million to avoid a federal civil rights lawsuit that they knew they would lose. Thorne didn't keep a dime of it. He donated the entire sum to the Veterans Housing Project he had been trying to fund, the very project he was meeting the mayor about that day. The building was named Liberty Hall. 6 months later, on Veterans Day, Elias Thorne stood at a podium in front of City Hall. His arm was in a sling. The surgery to repair his rotator cuff had been successful, but the recovery was slow. The crowd was massive. Police officers, veterans, citizens of all colors. He looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who has seen the worst of humanity and still believes in the best of it. Liberty, Thorne said, his voice echoing off the buildings, is not a gift. It is a practice. It is something we must do every single day. When we allow fear to dictate our actions, when we allow bias to blind our eyes, we are not free. We are prisoners of our own prejudice. He paused, looking at the spot on the corner where he had been arrested. I fought for this country, Thorne continued. I fought for the right of every man and woman to stand on a corner without fear. That badge, he pointed to the police officers in the front row, is a shield, not a sword. Use it to protect. Never use it to conquer. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just a speech, it was a command. The sun set over Atlanta. Elias Thorne walked to his car, the same silver Mercedes. He put a quarter in the meter just out of habit. He smiled a small, sad smile. He was free. But he knew the war wasn't over. It was just a different kind of battlefield now. We often think that titles, medals, and expensive suits are armor against injustice. But this story reminds us that prejudice sees only what it wants to see. Elias Thorne's dignity shattered a corrupt officer's career, but how many others have been broken in silence? It makes you wonder if a decorated war hero isn't safe from profiling who is. Do you think Officer Vance should have faced prison time instead of just losing his job? And what about the shop owner who made the false call? Should there be legal penalties for weaponizing the police? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in justice and want to see more stories where the truth wins, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us shine a light in the dark corners.
Case officially closed. For more authentic law enforcement footage, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for joining Bodycam Incident Reports.